My grandfather gave the best hugs in the world. That's the first thing people said about Walter Eugene Pruitt at his funeral. Not that he was successful, though he was. Not that he was generous, though he appeared to be. They said his hugs felt like being told everything was going to be okay by someone who genuinely believed it. I said it too. I was 26, standing at his graveside in a black dress in October wind, and I meant every word. That was 3 years ago. 2 years and 4 months ago, I found a Bible in the box of his belongings my grandmother asked me to sort through. Inside the Bible, tucked between Psalms and Proverbs, pressed flat like a dried flower, was a marriage certificate. Not my grandparents' marriage certificate. A different one, dated 11 years into my grandparents' marriage, with my grandfather's name on it, and a woman's name I had never heard. I stood in my grandmother's spare bedroom holding that document for a long time. Then I sat down on the floor because my legs had made a decision without consulting me. And I thought, okay, so that's who he was. Then I thought, then where did the money go? Let me tell you about my grandmother first, because she is the reason this story matters. Her name is Ruth. She's 78, 5 feet tall, and has the energy of someone who has decided aging is a suggestion. She grows roses. She does the crossword in pen. She was a bookkeeper for 31 years and can still calculate a 22% tip in her head faster than anyone at the table. She and Walter were married for 51 years. She raised 3 children, managed the household finances, and worked full-time through most of it because Walter's construction business had lean years that required 2 incomes to survive. When the business finally found its feeding in the late 80s, she was the one who kept the books straight while Walter glad-handed clients and closed deals. She is, in every practical sense, the reason Pruitt Construction existed at all. She just never had her name on the door. When Walter died, he left behind a will that everyone expected to be straightforward. The house, fully paid off, a retirement account, some investments, and the business, which he'd sold 3 years before his death, for a sum that my mother described as more than enough for Grandma to never worry again. The will distributed everything to my grandmother, with the house as primary asset. The retirement account went to my mother and her 2 brothers, split equally, as Walter had told them it would. What the will did not mention, where the money from the business sale had gone. The business had sold for $1.4 million. We knew this because the family had been told. What was in the estate, what was actually there when the attorneys did the accounting, was $340,000. More than $1 million was simply gone. The family attorney said Walter had been making private investments in his final years, that the money had been allocated elsewhere, that the documentation was still being compiled. We waited 6 months for that documentation. It never came. And then I found the Bible. Her name on the certificate was Miriam Solano. The marriage had taken place in a county 2 states away in 1974. My grandparents had married in 1962. By 1974, they had 2 children and a third on the way. I sat with that information for a week before I told anyone. I needed to know more before I did because telling my grandmother that her husband of 51 years had committed bigamy is not a conversation you have without being certain, and it is not a conversation you have without knowing what comes next. I started with a genealogy search. Public marriage records, if you know where to look and how to request them, are accessible. The marriage certificate in the Bible was real. I confirmed it against the county records within 48 hours. Then I searched for Miriam Solano. She was 69 years old. She lived in the same county where the certificate had been filed. She had, according to public records, owned a home there since 1979, a home that had been purchased, according to the county assessor's records, with a co-buyer, Walter Eugene Pruitt. He'd bought her a house 3 years into the second marriage, while my grandmother was bookkeeping for his struggling construction company and raising his children. I kept pulling threads. What I found over the next 3 weeks, piece by careful piece, Walter had maintained 2 households for approximately 30 years. Miriam's house was paid off, no mortgage, clear title, assessed for $380,000. There were financial records in Walter's estate documents, which I requested formally as a family member with standing, that showed regular transfers to an account I couldn't initially identify. I identified it eventually. It was in Miriam's name. Transfers totaling over the period I could document somewhere north of $400,000, not counting the house, not counting whatever portion of the business sales proceeds had flowed to her. My grandmother had spent 51 years building a life with a man who was spending her labor to fund a second one. I told my mother first, on a Tuesday evening at her kitchen table with the documents printed and organized in a folder, because I learned from somewhere, maybe from my grandmother actually, that hard information lands better when it's legible. My mother is not a woman who cries easily. She sat across from me and read through every page and did not cry. When she finished, she closed the folder, put her hands flat on top of it, and looked at the wall for a long moment. "Does Mom know?" she asked. "I don't think so," I said. "We have to tell her." "I know. I wanted to tell you first." She nodded. She was quiet for another minute. "He was my father," she said. "Not to me, just to the air, sorting something out loud. He was—" She stopped, started again. "He was a good father." "I know," I said. "Both things can be true." "Yes, they can." She looked at me. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking Grandma is owed money. I'm thinking that whatever Walter did with the proceeds of a business she helped build, she has a legal claim to an accounting of it. And I'm thinking we should find out if Miriam Solano knew she was the second wife." My mother blinked. "You think she didn't know?" "I have no idea, but it changes things depending on the answer." We told my grandmother on a Saturday. My mother and I together at Ruth's kitchen table with coffee she'd made before we arrived, because she always made coffee when family came. I want to be honest about this part. It was the hardest conversation I have ever been a part of. Ruth listened without interrupting. She read the marriage certificate. She looked at the transfer records. She held the document showing Walter's name on Miriam's house deed, and she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, in a voice that was completely steady, "How long have you known?" I said 3 weeks. I needed to understand what I was looking at before I brought it to you. She nodded once. "Good girl." She picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking. "He told me once that there were things in his past he wasn't proud of. I thought he meant the drinking before he stopped, or something from before we met." She looked out the window at her rose garden. "I didn't ask. I thought not asking was kindness." Neither my mother nor I said anything. "It wasn't kindness," she said. "It was foolishness." She looked back at us. "How much?" I told her the number, the total I'd been able to document. She absorbed it the way she absorbs everything, not with visible shock, but with a particular stillness that means she's rearranging the furniture of her understanding. "All right," she said. "What do we do?" We hired an estate litigation attorney named James Okafor, who had, according to 3 separate referrals, a specific talent at untangling complicated financial histories from estates that had been poorly or deliberately obscured. In our first meeting, I put the entire folder on his desk. He went through it page by page, asking quiet questions. When he finished, he looked up and said simply, "This is workable." What was workable was a claim against the estate for the undisclosed dissipation of marital assets. In plain language, Walter had spent money that was legally half my grandmother's without her knowledge or consent. The business proceeds, the transfers, the property, all of it was subject to her claim as a surviving spouse, who had been effectively defrauded. What made it complicated was Miriam. James explained that if Miriam knowingly entered a bigamous marriage, she had no legal standing as a spouse, and her claim to the property and transfers was significantly weakened. If she hadn't, if she was also a victim, the picture was more nuanced. "There's one way to find out," James said. "I know. I need to contact her." He looked at me carefully. "That's a significant step." "I'm aware." "Do you want me to—" "No. I'll do it myself." I wrote Miriam Solano a letter. Not an email, a letter, handwritten, 3 pages. I explained who I was. I explained what I had found. I enclosed a copy of my grandparents' 1962 marriage certificate. I told her I was not writing to threaten or accuse. I was writing because she deserved to know the truth, and because the answer to one question, whether she had known, would shape what came next for everyone. I mailed it on Wednesday. She called me 12 days later. Her voice was older than I had imagined, and very careful, in the way of someone choosing every word. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to believe that. I have no way to prove it, but I didn't know." I believed her. I still believe her. There was something in her voice, not just the words, but the texture underneath them. That was the sound of a person whose foundation had just been pulled out from under them. I recognized it because I'd heard it at my grandmother's kitchen table. "He told me that he'd never been married," he said.